Addiction, recovery, redemption. These are survivor stories. You are listening to Shattered.
Today I have Sandi Wilson with me. Sandi, let's start by you telling me a little bit about your childhood.
Okay. My dad was a Baptist preacher, and we moved a lot, and I was very quiet and shy, so I was always the new girl in class, and that made me worse, worse shy. And I have a sister who was 4 years younger, very outgoing, very socialized.
Daylight and dark.
And we were just complete opposites. So it was panic for me moving to a new place. But she loved it because it was just, she loved being the new girl and
Right.
getting lots of attention, yeah. And we both had to deal with domestic violence. My dad was extremely violent when he lost control. We think, the family thinks that he was bipolar.
He wouldn't drink or anything that would make him drunk? He would just explode?
Very explosive, yes.
Hmm.
And a lot of times would black out and not know what he did. He didn't have any memory of what he did.
Back then, they probably didn't even know about bipolar.
No. Let's say that would have been probably 20 years before
Right.
anybody knew much at all. Yeah.
So he would just black out and not remember
He would
the
just get
episode.
so angry, rageful, that he would just lose what was going on.
So anybody or anything that was in his path was just in harm's way.
Yeah. I tried to rescue my mother and my sister. I became the rescuer. There's a psychological game that's called rescuer, victim, and the perpetrator. And in our home, by the time I was about 7, I was the rescuer. So if I'd hear him beating on my mother, I would go try to intervene.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
I
that would
became
put you in harm's way.
Well, and he would tell, when he was in his 40s and 50s, he would tell people that I was the little mother in the home, and he was proud of it. He would be bragging and have no insight into the fact that children are not supposed to be parents.
When you're 7 years
Yeah.
old, you're not supposed to be trying to rescue your mother.
Yes.
How long did that go on?
Well, I left home when I was 17, and a widow across the street from us, my dad had a church in central Arkansas, and there was a widow that lived across the street from us beside the church, and I got real close to her, and she offered to rent me the upstairs. I was working at a donut shop at that time, and she offered to rent me the upstairs and let me use the kitchen. And actually, after they left town and it was just me and her, the car that I had broke down, and she also let me use her car to go back and forth to work, yeah. And then I started college and worked my way through college, so I lived with her about 3 years.
So talk about what your goal was when you first started college.
I was going to be a teacher when I first started. And I took some education classes and I was very bored. So I decided I didn't want to be a teacher. So then, I was taking some business classes at the time and I liked them pretty well. And it taught me how to manage budgeting and some things, So I enjoyed that, so I changed my major to business. And then in my junior year, I found out that I had to take 15 more hours of economics under a professor that was extremely boring.
Oh, no.
And I thought, I can't do that because I usually slept through his class. But most of the time I didn't go. So I changed then. In my junior year, I changed over to psychology and sociology because those were the classes I liked the best. But I didn't really have a clue what I wanted to do.
Right.
So I ended up with a double major in psychology and sociology, and I got a first job in a psychology department in an agency. So I ended up in psychology.
Which you, from your childhood, that would, at the time, you would have thought that would not been something you would have wanted to have
Right.
done.
Now the training back in those days was very different than it is now. I mean, I never had one class about trauma or domestic violence or children being molested or any of the realities that we deal with today. We had abnormal psychology, and that talked about schizophrenia, manic depressive, but it was a very different training
Wow.
than it's today. When I was in graduate school, I had been working with some autistic children in the agency where I worked. And I went to graduate school and I expected those teachers to be able to tell me something
Right.
that I needed in order to work with them because I was going back to work there when I finished my master's. But I got up there and the teachers knew nothing. They didn't know anything about autism. And they taught that schizophrenia was caused by cold mothers, not
Really?
not nurturing children, etc.
Huh.
Well, I argued with them because I said that's ridiculous. I've met too many parents dealing with children
Right.
that are nothing like that. There's
Right.
got to be something physical going on, something genetic, and they would just laugh at me. But that was like back in '60.
Now they wouldn't laugh.
Yeah, now. I was a rebel back in my day. Because I would argue with them.
Right.
Yeah, because
Well, I
I
mean,
thought it was
common
stupid what
sense,
they
so-
were teaching.
Right.
Yeah.
Common sense would kind of tell you that that wasn't the case for autism.
But they weren't, none of them had worked in a long time, and they were just teaching what they'd learned.
Right.
So,
Learning what you did in college, is that what helped you decide that your dad probably was
yes.
bipolar?
Yes. And then I've got a younger sister who's an RN, and then she went through her training. So she was probably in her early 30s, and I was in my early 50s when we decided that's what it was.
Right.
And then my dad had 5 bypasses, and they never told us that that's why they were medicating him. But the way they medicated him, we decided he had gotten very manic after the surgery, and he drove those nurses just completely crazy. So, and they had medicated him, so we decided then that the VA probably decided he was bipolar.
Right.
Yeah.
So they never really formally diagnosed him.
Not that we saw,
Right.
no. So but we didn't have power of attorney or anything.
Right.
We were just the daughters.
Right. So what happened after college?
Well, after I finished graduate school, I got married and had a child. So my degree was delayed because of those things. But I finally got my thesis done and got graduated. I was about 3 years
Right.
behind where I could have graduated. Yeah.
Tell me about the job interview.
That's embarrassing to me now.
Good story.
I know. Well, I had graduated in May, had a bachelor's at that time, and Arkansas Children's Colony was in the town that I lived in. And I got a phone call one day, and they were inviting me over for a job interview. Well, I was babysitting that day, so I just went like I was. I had on flip-flops and shorts and my hair in pigtails, and I didn't wear my glasses and didn't have any makeup on, and I was carrying a kid. And that's how I went to a job interview. Because I didn't know you were supposed, I didn't know anything about having job interviews. But anyway, they did hire me, so
So it worked.
yeah. And I ended up working with the boss that I had was from Puerto Rico, and he helped me a whole lot as far as training in the real world.
Right.
And then one of the guys that I was in school with worked there also, so we helped each other. And then in the first year I was there, I went to a training, and I had read in the personnel policies and procedures that when you went to a training, if the colony paid expenses, you were supposed to write up a summary of the training with. So I did, and I turned that in just because the thing said to do it.
Right.
Well, maybe 3 or 4 days later, the director of the whole colony comes in my office one morning and sits down and starts chatting and talks, and then before I know it, he's offering to send me to graduate school and pay me half salary while I went if I would work for the children's colony for 2 years when I came back.
Right.
So that's how I went to graduate school. They paid me half salary while I went, yeah.
When did you first start dealing with substance abuse within your family?
Well, I guess my very first experience was with my brother-in-law, and he was using meth really bad. And he was at my mother-in-law's house. She called me. She was just in a panic. He had a butcher knife. He was cutting himself and screaming and just out of it.
Mm.
And I told her to call the police and call the ambulance, but tell them to park down on the end of the street until I could get there. And I got there and I talked him into going for a walk with me. So by the time we got back, they were in place then. They had it all set up, and they went ahead and checked him out and everything, and we ended up admitting him for a hospitalization. And he was in there, I think, 4 days, and then they discharged him. So that was my very first experience, knowing absolutely nothing, having absolutely no classes, no training, no nothing. So I was just kind of thrown in the lion's den that first time. But he was 17 and I was like 23.
Was he trying to commit suicide, or
No,
he
was just completely
out
out
of his
it.
head
Yeah.
at 17 years old?
And he loved me, so he agreed to go walking with me.
Right.
And I asked him to give me the knife, and he gave it to me, and I gave it back to my mother-in-law. And so we were safe while we were walking. But I was just doing whatever I could think of that I thought might help. Yeah.
Save his life.
Yes. So that was my very first experience. And then later on through the years, there's been closer relatives within my family, yeah.
For various different type drugs?
Well, I've got a niece who was multiply addicted to alcohol and a lot of drugs.
Right.
And family members closer to me, other drugs and meth. And then a nephew that was just about anything he could get his hands on. So we've had several in our family.
Right. Unfortunately, there's probably not too many families in the United States that can say they don't have any friend or family that they know of that's been addicted to something.
No, it's very prevalent.
It is. And that's in every state.
Yeah. And it's in every socioeconomic status. I know back in years ago when it kind of first started becoming a problem, there was a general consensus that it was mostly people who were uneducated or
Right.
low
And that's just not
socioeconomic
true.
status. That's not true at all. It's everywhere.
I have too many friends that have careers that, whether it was a car accident or whatever, the doctor prescribed them opioids, and the next thing they know, their
They're
life
addicted.
is spiraled out of control.
Yeah. Well, we've got an opioid addiction prevalence in this country. It's become a crisis.
It is a crisis. It's a horrific crisis that even if they cut off the opioids today, I mean, the addiction, it's got to be treated.
Well, people can get it. They don't have to have prescriptions anymore. They
Right.
can get it on the street.
Well, a lot of the interviews that I've done, they will start out with opioids, and then if the prescription gets cut off, to buy the opioids on the black market is so expensive. The addiction is still there, so then they resort to meth because it's a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
Um,
And then they become addicted to meth
sure,
on top of the opioid.
right, absolutely. They just shift from one addiction to the other.
Yeah.
What do you do today?
Well, I retired from the mental health center in 2012, and I opened my own office here in DeQueen.
And it's called?
Well, it was called Transitions Psychological Services. But last year, in May, I closed that office, and I have joined with Chanel Family Therapy. They're out of West Little Rock. And they're kind of a umbrella of a lot of private practices all over the state.
Right. So you do have an office here in DeQueen?
Yes, it's in Town North. And my daughter's working with me now, which is something I've always wanted. So
And is she a psychological examiner as well?
no, she's a licensed professional counselor.
Oh, really?
She always said when she was in school, "Mama, I'm not going to do what you do."
And then that changed.
And she ended up doing what I do.
That's just like you had said earlier, that was not your goal in life. But that's what God,
That's how it turned out.
yeah, you didn't realize that God had that plan for you.
Well, going to a job interview like I went to a job interview is a good example of the Lord just kind of opened doors and I just fall through the door.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're a psychological examiner.
Uh-huh.
And what all does that consist of?
Well, I do individual and family therapy. And I do evaluations like for the courts, for Social Security, for Arkansas Rehabilitation Services, for just different agencies.
Right.
And I get referrals from doctors and
So it's anything
Different
from
people.
like panic attacks, anxieties.
yes, covers the whole gamut of mental health, yeah.
Right.
And the evaluation just depends on what the question is and what I need to do. And if I don't do evaluations, I'm doing treatment. So it's one or the other.
Right. So you diagnose it and treat it.
Yes.
So a doctor may send someone to you to diagnose if it's bipolar or panic attacks, PTSD.
Or they may just have a question about what are we dealing with here. And
Right.
we will do an evaluation and tell them what we see. It's a consultation type of evaluation.
Right.
Yeah.
And for certain type of disabilities and stuff, they may send
Can
them
be
to you.
anything.
Right.
Yeah. Now, when I'm working for Social Security, it's strictly for disability.
Right.
But otherwise, referrals can come for any reason.
And does most insurances cover evaluations and things like that?
Most of them do, yes. Now, Lee and I, neither one can provide services under Medicare because we don't have the licensure that requires. So we can't accept Medicare. But all of the private insurances and Medicaid and some of the public we can take, yeah. I guess the main thing we can't take is Medicare.
Right.
And we're talking to a social worker about coming in with us who can take Medicare.
So at this time, but
Yes.
Hopefully in the near future.
We're hoping.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you have a website?
I had one when I had my own practice, and Chanel has one as an overall agency,
Right.
but not specifically for each site.
So on the Chanel website, it would list your location here in DeQueen
Yes,
with the phone
it
number.
would, yes.
What is your office phone number?
We don't have an office phone number.
It goes through Chanel.
Chanel handles all of the scheduling and that kind of thing. We don't even actually have a phone.
Right. So is that Chanel.com? And do you know the...
Chanel, Chenal, familytherapy.com.
Okay. We will add that in on the podcast. That way they can know how to get a hold of you. Because...
And the main number is where they call
and
to
make
make
the appointment to see
yes.
you or your daughter. She also works for Chanel.
Yes. They'll actually schedule with whoever's available
Right.
first. Yeah.
Right. So you and your daughter both see the same type, or is it you're geared to more toward certain?
No, we both see conglomeration
Right.
of referral questions, yeah.
Okay. Very good. Is there anything that we have missed that you would like to add?
The main thing is that I think we're doing better now as a society in recognizing that mental health is not a bad character or
Absolutely.
something bad about the person. That mental health issues are, by and large, physiological or genetic or a combination
Absolutely.
of the two. They're doing a lot of research now that's showing, literally showing brain changes that are made in the brains of people who have gone through various traumas. And that's not something that anybody can change or help or
Right.
anything. It's the work that's being done now compared to when I started in my practice is phenomenal.
Right.
For me, it's so exciting that they're finally realizing what we're dealing with.
Absolutely. I've dealt with a lot of people through the years that, whether it was bipolar or schizophrenia or whatever, and they're put on medication, but they say they hate the way it makes them feel. So then they start self-medicating.
Yes.
And that's where substance abuse comes in.
That has a lot to do with it.
And when you take someone with mental illness and they self-medicate with meth or whatever, that intensifies that problem.
Well, actually, I've had a lot of people who were diagnosed with bipolar disorder that told me that meth actually worked like ADHD medicine does. It helped them to stabilize and calm down.
Really?
And which to me is phenomenally crazy because it's so dangerous.
Right.
To the brain and to the body. And yet, if it has that kind of response in the body,
Right.
then they're going to not just be physiologically addicted, they're going to become psychologically addicted simply because it's helping so much.
Well, but, or is it just they think that it helps? Like,
I
for
don't know.
instance, in bipolar, don't you stay up for so many days and, it's like you're
Depends on
way
what
up or you're way
type,
down.
yeah.
And then meth, you would also stay up for days on end. And the lack of sleep starts playing tricks on your mind.
That's true. But I've sure had a lot of them say that.
Really? Well, that's sad that they would self-medicate with meth
Yes.
because they think it's doing them some good. And the overall outcome, I wouldn't think health-wise.
Well, I know research showed at least 25 years ago that marijuana can make someone who is bipolar manic very quickly
Oh, wow.
and need to be hospitalized. A doctor, a psychiatrist in Australia found that out. So there's a lot of research showing how drugs affect people with different diagnoses.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
Right.
I don't know that research has shown that. I've just had a lot of
Studies.
people say they have thought that meth helped them.
Right.
So that's, to me, that's very scary because it's imploding the positive changes. At the same time, it's exacerbating all the
Right.
negative changes.
Absolutely.
Because they're psychologically at the point thinking, I really do better when I've got this.
And is that best for them long-term?
No. It's going to ruin their lives and kill them.
Absolutely. And the addiction's just going to be massive.
I worked with, before I left mental health, I worked with 3 kids younger than 21 who had been using bath salts. And 2 of the 3 had so much massive brain damage that they were extremely psychotic and never got better.
Well, I've always heard that once those brain cells are gone,
They're gone.
they're gone.
Now, I've had head injuries and strokes, and what I have found out personally, the brain cells are gone when they're gone. Now, we've got a lot of cells that we don't use. So, the rehabilitation is going to activate new cells
Right.
in the brain.
That have been kind of dormant.
Yeah. So, usually, people can get better from any kind of brain injury, but not always.
Right.
And the 2 that I worked with were the saddest cases because they had not been used in a long time.
Is bath salts here?
Oh yes, very much so.
And is it young?
They're worse than meth. It's worse than meth.
Why? Because it's easier to get their hands on it?
I don't know. It just does worse damage, and the damage is longer term. And so 2 of my family members, they used drugs extremely for years. Still have no major deficits, which to me is a miracle.
Right.
And a 19-year-old that used bath salts twice ended up, and his mind's gone forever.
Right.
He's not going to get better.
I know someone like that, and it's from huffing paint.
That'll do it too. Massive brain damage.
Oh, it's awful.
Yeah.
I mean, in the summer, when I would get around them, I'd bond them out of jail, and they would sweat through their pores, and it was such a horrific smell. It was awful.
Yeah.
I hate that bath salts. I mean, is it just bath salts like that you buy in a store?
No, it's just, it's a drug named that, but it's a combination.
But do they mix it with like bath salts that you could get in a store?
I don't know how it's made. I just know that's what it's called. But it's even worse than the street meth that people get a hold of.
Right.
It's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, that is sad. I don't know anybody personally in this area that's doing bath salts, but I know that at one time it was pretty common around Little Rock in that area, but I guess it's just everywhere.
Speaking of Little Rock, not long ago I was informed that Little Rock is one of the biggest human trafficking
It is.
stops.
It's because Interstate 30 and 40 and all that are right there. And yes, it is one of the biggest
You know,
major
Arkansas is
intersections.
usually behind by 20 years,
Yeah,
and here we are in the forefront of human trafficking.
right.
We're sure not proud of that. It's awful.
It is awful. Human trafficking, sex trafficking, that is all just right. It's like Little Rock is in the heart of that.
I know.
It's very sad. Do you want to add anything else?
I can't think of anything.
Thank you so much, Sandy, for coming in today.
You're welcome.
Okay. Hi, I'm Dee. I'm the host of The Shattered Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell on the notifications so you won't miss an episode. I'm very passionate about helping families. If you are an expert that would like to help or would like to share your testimony, please contact me. Thank you.